After all the amazing support on the last video, going over every character's strongest state, it only felt natural to follow up with every character's weakest state. So, let's take a look back and see just how dog shit some of these characters have been in Overwatch 2 history. Beginning with D.Va, her weakest state was on November 17th of 2022, when she received nerfs coming into Season 2. Going into Overwatch 2, it was felt that her being an off-tank would struggle to adjust to the 5v5 format, so going into the game, they buffed pretty much everything about her, including her missiles, booster damage, fusion cannon spread, as well as the movement speed penalty. During Season 1, she was arguably the best tank in the entire game, and was really only held back by Zarya, who was also super broken at this time. Once Season 2 dropped, her weapon spread was increased, as well as her booster damage impact also being lowered. This was massive, as this was a big weakening to her burst combo, making her much less lethal. After these nerfs, D.Va was still a solid B to A tier character, before small buffs began coming in the next few months, making Season 2 her weakest state. I don't even think I need an intro for Doomfist. His weakest state by far was on release. Coming into Overwatch 2, he was reworked to a tank. Now, in my opinion, Doom is much more healthy as a tank than a DPS, but on release, he was just fucking terrible. Now, I didn't play that much during this time, but apparently during the beta of Overwatch 2, he was actually quite strong, and had a lot of techs that were removed coming into launch. During this period, Doom was pretty objectively agreed on to be the worst character in the game, and was considered a throw pick, till he was giga buffed in Season 2, which put him in his strongest state. So go check out the strongest states video if you want to see just how insane he was during this time. But just know on release, he was fucking terrible. 2 is really one of the only characters that could compete with Doom for being the worst. After creating the Jotes meta in beta, her shout was hard nerfed, however the biggest nerf to her was the addition of Kiriko and Suzu. On release, she was buns. And just for reference, back then she only had a 1x multiplier on her Adrenaline Rush passive compared to the 2.5x it is today, as well as wound healing ending once someone dies, and Carnage's cooldown not being reduced when hitting someone, and Jagged Blade not having wound damage. Junkerqueen was buffed in the next 4 patches she was in, and these were not light buffs either, these were pretty sizable buffs. Until finally, she was put in her strongest state. But on release, man, this was just a fucking low for her. Now, Mauga is very weird, as he was in the big Giga buff patch to tanks, where he received a lot of changes to his cardiac overdrive. However, I would actually say his weakest state was in Season 9, when HP pools were changed. This was right after he just received a ton of massive nerfs to him. But the main reason Season 9 was so bad for him was because of the DPS passive. During this time, he had a 20% healing reduction compared to the 10% healing reduction it is today. Armor was also much weaker than it is today, not to mention all the nerfs he had coming into this season. This all changed though when he was giga buffed back to the top before quickly being nerfed back down. Now, I was going back and forth on whether to make this his lowest state or his current form, because even after the big buffs to D.Va, he's still been decent, but he does get eaten alive. However, his ability to be good in a Hog or Ram just barely put him over the edge. Orisa has been incredibly polarizing in Overwatch 2, generally following a cycle of being bad, then getting a ton of micro buffs, then becoming broken, then getting nerfed, and then repeating the cycle again. But this time, in Season 10, the devs decided to listen to the community and sent Orisa into the ground, nerfing Fortify by reducing its duration from 4.5 to 3.5 seconds, as well as giving her a 20% movement speed penalty when using the ability. Javelin Spin's cooldown was also increased from 7 seconds to 9 seconds. This made Orisa the worst character in the game overnight. Currently, Orisa is seeming to repeat history, as she has again been receiving a ton of micro buffs that seemingly at this point will cause her to be meta again. However, we will see. Yo, future me popping in? Yeah, I was fucking right. Now, I'm not sure if anyone remembers, but Release Ram was probably one of the most overhyped characters in Overwatch, competitive strength wise. Now, I could tell you all the issues with Ram on release, but I think I'll let this clip of Flats do it for me.
Contrary to most people's belief, I think he's not very good. I think that he actually is kind of a gimmick tank. I think he'll be very good at like pub stomping lower ranks. I think especially his ultimate is going to be one of those ults where you just pop it and like walk into the other 5 enemies and just stand there and they're going to shoot at you, and your 2 supports are probably playing on a Moira are just going to sit there and just heal the tank the entire time. Then they're on a Moira are going to sit there and heal the tank because they're not like looking to DPS or anything like that. And you know, it's in high level play not going to really work. He's really just, I think, really bad against like going through this list. I think he's really bad against Rein. I think he's bad against Zarya. I think he's bad against Winston. I think he's bad against Doomfist. I think he's awful versus Hog. Like Hog just destroys him. I think Sigma's better. Like, all of these tanks offer something else. Rein, who's really bad right now in high elo, is the dominant tank up close. Ramatra's punchy punch form really doesn't hold the candle to the hammer swings and will get out-damaged and outmatched and overpowered over time. Sigma is a much better poking tank, having a constant shield that can be put up and taken off cooldown. His Suck, which is a defense matrix off a 12-second cooldown, as well as a hard stun combo that can one-shot squishies if you land the left click and the rock together. He's just so much stronger. He doesn't have great self-sustain. The Nemesis form is not bad. However, though, the range is not that impressive. 11 meters might sound like a lot on paper, but most poke fights going into a fight in Overwatch are much further than 12 meters. 12 meters is like Reinhardt range. If we were fighting Overwatch matches up this close all the time, you'd pick Reinhardt, and Reinhardt would be dominating. But unfortunately, that's just not the day-in-day Overwatch that we play.
After his underwhelming release, he received big buffs coming in a comp, which gave him more armor on Nemesis form, as well as reducing the cooldown on his shield. But the big one was his Nemesis form now giving a 20% movement speed buff. After this, Ram was very strong, but was gatekept by Hog and Orisa, but this was still a far cry to his release form. Reinhardt's weakest state was in Season 9, and oh man was this a sad time. Rein hasn't had the greatest history in the world in Overwatch 2, but Season 9 was a different level. During this time, I would argue he was the worst character in the game during this time, which is super telling because Season 9 brought a lot of characters up and a lot of them down. With HP pools going up, Rein couldn't kill anything. The DPS passive hurt him a lot as a brawl tank, but honestly it didn't matter because he couldn't even get to anyone fast enough to kill him anyway. Fire Strike was also not increased in damage, meaning that hitting 2 Fire Strikes, which alone was super difficult, was no longer able to kill a squishy. He was so bad that he began receiving buffs on March 12th, giving him more armor as well as increasing Fire Strike's damage, making this his weakest state.
Shields up, full HP. In front of a window, they pop the window. They pop the window. No person. There isn't a human on the planet who has that kind of reaction speed. That's not viable. That shouldn't be a thing. If you sit there and go, well, they pop window. I don't give a fuck. There shouldn't be a world where he is full HP with shield, in which, in literally less than a fraction of a second, they go all the way from full to 0. There isn't a human alive who will react to that in time.
Season 2, otherwise known as Hog's wet dream, was his peak in strength. However, in Season 3, he finally woke up and was hit with the nerf hammer, removing his one-shot and nerfing his damage in general. After these nerfs, Hog was the worst he has ever been. During this time, he would have been the worst character in the game if not for Lifeweaver coming into the game. Hog was so bad for months, and even after his rework, it took several buffs for him to become meta again. Poor Hog has spent a lot of time in the farm, though I think we can all agree, unless you play him, he kinda deserves it. Sigma has been probably the most consistent character in Overwatch history. He has really never been bad, besides you could maybe argue right now because D.Va with Juno is super strong. However, stats wise, his weakest state was in December of 2023 when his barrier regeneration rate was reduced from 100 to 85 per second. This really changed absolutely nothing, and pretty much after this, Sigma was pretty much not changed, but really only received buffs in the next few months. Currently, Sigma is still solid and really only has been in poke comps. Like Sigma, Winston has been consistently very strong in Overwatch 2, and has really only received mostly buffs. His quote weakest state was in February of 2023 when his barrier HP was reduced by 50. This really changed absolutely nothing. The only time he's really struggled is meta changes like Bastion being giga buffed, which is super good against him. However, Winston for the most part has always been a strong pick, and if he's not the best tank in the game, has really always been a healthy second or third for the most part. I think you're going to start to see a trend with most of the tanks being pretty bad on release, and Ball is no different. Wrecking Ball is probably one of the hardest tanks to rework into the 5v5 format, and I think in theory I can see their vision for how they want Ball to play. However, for the most part, it kinda flopped. Not that Ball is necessarily bad in current day, but he is really underpicked, and even if he is the best tank in the game, people just don't really want to pick him anyway. On release, pretty much everything about Ball just wasn't there. His pile driver was still at 10 seconds instead of 8. This is obviously before his little rework he got. He didn't have shield HP either, and his mine still took 1.5 seconds to arm instead of 1, which was later changed to 1.25 due to balance. Another thing people don't talk about is that characters can now passively heal, which didn't exist yet. This release period came to an end when he received his first of many buffs on February 7th. Poor Ball, but honestly, I ain't gonna cap, that hoe is annoying, especially if I'm playing Ana, so hey, I'm not complaining. Everyone that came back to Overwatch when they added it 2 remembers that Zarya was insane on release, and probably the best tank in the entire game at this time. You can check the Strongest States video if you want to hear more about that. But what people don't remember was the giga nerfs that she got on November 17th. Nerfing her bubble duration by 0.5 seconds and increasing the cooldown by an entire second. After this, Zarya instantly dropped and really was never able to climb back up. Zarya is a good example of a character that in theory should be a great fit for the 5v5 format, with her bubbles being able to keep herself alive but also enable her teammates. But in practice just falls flat due to the way the game is played and that it feels like Zarya is just mostly ignored instead of targeted. These dark times for Zarya ended on January 5th, energy depletion being buffed, but it still really didn't help her. Zarya for the next few months just sank lower and lower into the mid tiers, and for months to come was stuck in that limbo. Ashe, weirdly enough, has actually been changed very little in Overwatch, and surprisingly was worse in Season 4. Now, this might be weird because she did just recently get nerfed, which is really the only nerf she has received. However, a nerf that many people probably don't remember is when she lost the ability to gain ult charge when Bob was active. This is actually a pretty big nerf and has been in the game for years. It's kind of crazy that they brought this in and put it under a bug fix. Nevertheless, Ashe is still really good and currently in the game is still the best hit scan in the game. The only reason I really put this version of Ashe above her is because of all the buffs to Bob in recent seasons, pushing her just over the edge. Bastion has definitely had his moments in the spotlight. However, for the most part in Overwatch 2 has been a relatively niche character. His lowest point though was in Season 11, when armor was buffed to now reduce 10 damage per projectile. This really hurt Bastion as he is significantly weaker against armor than he was before. If it wasn't bad enough, D.Va was also super strong after the big tank buffs, which is probably Bastion's worst matchup. Currently, he's a little better as a lot of the tanks have been toned down slightly, with the significant one being armor now reducing 7 damage per projectile instead of 10. but Bastion is still in a rough spot and really has been for a while. Cassidy has received a ton of changes in Overwatch, whether it's his HP going up or down, or his grenade / flashbang reworks. He's been really all over the place. However, his worst state was probably on release. Now, he did have a little bit of a fall in August of 2023, but on release the big thing about Cassidy was his grenade, which at the time had no hinder or was his flashbang. This version was just a seeking missile that did a flat 131 damage, which is a pretty weird number. However, Cassidy overall just felt terrible. This grenade did pretty much nothing to tanks. It felt like a cheesy ability that really wasn't that effective. Keep in mind that this was before all of the changes Cassidy got, like for example the increase to his fall-off range from 20 to 25 meters, which is pretty funny because it's 20 today. During this time, Cassidy didn't have all the things he does now, and he just felt like a shitty character to play. You kinda had to be there to feel it, but he was just bad, that's really all I can say, making this his weakest state in Overwatch 2. Echo has been a pretty underpicked character in Overwatch 2, and this is reflected in her balance changes. Believe it or not, she was only changed once in 2023, and has only been changed 3 times in 2024 so far, and no changes in 2022. She has always been in an A to low S tier character, however, I would probably say her worst state is actually right now. After she received her HP nerf from 250 to 225, she's currently still a solid character, but with characters like Ashe being as strong as she is, the environment just isn't the best for her right now. But personally, as an Echo main, I know that the sun will shine on us again, at least I frickin' hope. Man, talk about a character in Overwatch that has pretty much received no changes. We all remember when Genji was hit with massive nerfs to his primary fire, along with the removal of the DPS passive, really hurting him and pretty much just killing him on the spot. However, I would actually say Genji is even worse right now than he was then. In Season 9, health pools were buffed, but not Blade's damage, and while they did buff the swing speed, it really doesn't matter because if you're doing flat damage with Blade, but it's not doing more damage, you're not killing anything with a bunch of burst healing that's in this game. Currently, Dive is strong, and you can play Genji in that, but there really just is no reason to play him. He literally cannot kill anything. Truly, he just feels absolutely shit to play. Honestly though, I think just for good measure, we should remove his dash's ability to reset after getting a kill. Because, I mean guys, come on, let's be honest, we don't want Genji getting out of hands. We know how bad he was in Season 1. Blizzard, I think we need action to be taken right now. Hanzo. Man, I just don't even know. I'm just gonna say, you know it's bad when I'm actually starting to feel bad for Hanzo mains. Hanzo recently received his one-shot back, however at the cost of his hit speed, and the fact his arrows are no longer affected by global projectile buffs. Now, I just need you to put this in perspective. Hanzo had his one-shot added back to a character, but somehow they are arguably worse than when they didn't have it. Keep in mind, they added the thing I hate about Hanzo back, and yet he still sucks. Hanzo is arguably the worst DPS in the game, and honestly, I might actually have to start becoming a Hanzo advocate, bro. Because he is just horse shit. Free my boy. Free my boy. Just kidding, keep his ass in fucking garbage. I hate Hanzo. Fuck out of here. Finally breaking the streak of characters sucking in their current form, Junkrat's weakest state was in Season 9 when global HP pools were buffed. The new DPS passive really didn't help Junkrat that much, and while the bigger projectile sizes in theory would be good for him, it was overshadowed by characters like Ashe and Widow and just other hit scans who could mark the DPS passive much better. However, the biggest thing that killed Junkrat was the removal of his one-shot combo. This immediately put an already dogshit character into the dirt. Junkrat became the worst DPS in the game and arguably the worst character in the game. There really was just no reason to pick Junkrat. There were better spam characters and better people that can mark the DPS passive. The best thing about him was his one-shot combo, which did just get snapped away. This period came to an end just a week and a half later, on February 21st, when his concussive mine would receive a damage buff, cooldown reduction, and a minimum damage buff. This didn't bring back his one-shot combo, but it was something. which ended his weakest state here. Mei on release, well, maybe not a bad character. With the way the meta was, she really just wasn't very good. At the time, Zarya was super good, and walling her off really didn't matter because she could just bubble, and the uptime was so insane that she could just survive. And then D.Va and Winston, the other two meta tanks, really weren't affected because they could just go over it. Rush tanks like Rein and Junkerqueen really weren't that good, and she just overall struggled during this period. This ult came to an end on February 7th when her ult would receive a small damage cost reduction. Mei has gone through a lot of changes over the years, but in my opinion, this was her weakest state. Which is weird to say because she has received a ton of changes, but overall she's actually mostly been buffed looking at her overall history. Pharah is one of the very few characters to receive an actual full rework to their kit, which in my opinion, while it took a bit of getting used to, was probably the best rework they have ever done in Overwatch 2. That being said, release was definitely her worst state. I think if anything, this video shows that power creep is real. Very real. On release, she didn't have the rework to her kit that she does now, which previously put her in her strongest state. Overall, Pharah was pretty much just doing what she always has, being good in the middle ranks and console, and then pretty much falling off once you get to the higher ranks. She wasn't terrible, just not really worth the opportunity cost. Like in February, she received an ult cost reduction, which is nice but didn't change a whole lot about her, making release her lowest point, which is funny because she didn't have to touch the ground as much because her fuel replenishes in the air. Get it?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Reaper, unlike some of these other characters, has actually only received buffs with his time in Overwatch 2. However, Season 11 hit like a truck. Now, the original change to armor, removing the flat 30% damage reduction and bringing it to a 5 damage production per projectile, hurt a ton because of his shotgun pellet nature. However, this only got worse when in Season 11, the armor was changed from 5 to 10. Now, Reaper pretty much did absolutely nothing to armored targets, like D.Va, Orisa, and even Winston, who Reaper was supposed to be good against. During this period, Reaper pretty much just sucked at tank busting, and sucked as a duelist. If you wanted a purely tank bust, pick Hanzo with Storm Arrow, which was honestly a better option, and we all know how bad he was during this phase. And if you want a duelist, just play Cassidy. This all changed when tanks across the board received nerfs in Season 12, as well as HP pools being lowered on a lot of characters. This actually makes Reaper pretty good right now because he has such an advantage against a lot of those characters, but man did he suck during that Season 11 period. With a crazy one-shot and Thunder Thighs, Sojourn pretty much has been at the top for all of Overwatch 2. Nerfed after nerf, and sometimes even buffs for some reason, it wasn't enough. That was until Season 11 when she received a massive nerf to her railgun, reducing its damage by a ton. They gave her some buffs, but this overall put her in the ground quickly. Now, at the time, people weren't entirely sure where she was at after this, but they soon found out when the great tank buffs happened, which buffed armor and now made Sojourn do 4.5 damage to armor, which is just laughable. She was super bad, and so bad in fact, that in many people's eyes she went from a top 4 DPS in the game to a bottom 2 in mere days. However, just 2 months later, on August 20th, they gave her some buffs to her weapon spread, going from 2 to 1.6 degrees, her now gaining 10 energy from getting a headshot instead of just 5, and her energy depletion rate being reduced from 33 to 15 per second after 7 seconds. While these buffs did help, she is still one of the worst DPS in the game, but maybe with future changes, could see a rise again. Soldier 76 has had it rough in Overwatch 2, ever since the nerfing of the DPS passive and the changes to armor. Like Sojourn, Season 11 was a new low for Soldier, with the big buffs to armor now making Soldier only do 9 damage to armor. At least for Sojourn, she actually got some buffs, but Soldier got no such thing. While armor has been nerfed, so now he does 12 damage to armor, this is still pretty rough for a character that can really only shoot and run. Especially with Dive being as good as it is right now, and D.Va, who just eats Soldier up. Soldier currently is really not seeing his best days, but if you want a peek of what those days did look like, feel free to check out the Strongest State video to see his former glory. Sombra has gone through many changes, a lot of which affecting pretty much everything in her kit. On release, she was very strong with dive characters like Tracer, Winston, and Genji, who were some of her best friends. With Sombra naturally being a very annoying character, she was nerfed coming into Season 2 on November 11th. This reduced the ability lockout of hack from 1.75 seconds to 1.5, as well as no longer giving wall hacks to your teammates. But the big one was the nerfing of her passive, making her do only 25% more damage to hack targets instead of 40. With dive also falling out of the meta, this pretty much sent Sombra to the Shadow Realm. Almost everyone agreed that Sombra was probably the worst character in the game, and if not like bottom 3, and everyone was happy. But the devs are trying to make a balanced game, so on February 7th, her machine pistol bullets received a damage increase, and the hack duration on health packs were also increased to 45 seconds instead of 30, making this her weakest state in Overwatch 2. Hey, so future me coming in. I was actually about to put this video out, but then of course Sombra gets a stupid rework that just threw her into a grave. It's still pretty new, so I don't want to definitively say this is her worst state, but I think I'm going to predict that this will be. After playing her, it feels like she doesn't have a place in the game. She plays now more like a Cassidy rather than a backline menace. I also found it pretty much impossible to consistently build an EMP, which is one of the strongest ultimates in the game. Season 2 was bad, but I feel like she is actually unplayable right now. But who knows, this might age like milk because we all slept on Pharah's rework when it came out, but we then later realized she was busted. So with Sombra, I'm gonna give it some time. Symmetra is difficult to balance because her design naturally makes her good on specific maps and then terrible on others like Junkertown. That being said, she has a lot of changes over the last several years, but I would probably have to go with Release being her worst state. She wasn't really bad, just not amazing, and kinda got run over by a lot of the characters that were better than her. Current day Sim has a lot of things that Sim in the past just didn't have. In Overwatch 2, they actually removed her ability to gain ammo off of shooting bears, however they later gave this back to her. At one point they also gigabuffed her, allowing her to also heal off of shooting bears and gain wall hacks from her turrets. Her primary fire also charges 45% faster than it did back then, though decay is 20% quicker. Overall, Sim has always been doing Sim things, and generally pretty annoying, but on release, compared to her future buffs, was pretty garbage. Torb has overall been very consistent in Overwatch 2, receiving both nerfs and buffs. However, his lowest state was in Season 7 when his power got shifted around a little bit. His secondary fire sped got reduced from 5 to 4.5, which is a buff, as well as his overload now reloading 6 ammo, with the trade-off being his turret now going from 14 damage to 11, as well as the cooldown going from 10 to 12. This definitely hurt Torb, but overall didn't really change his place much in the meta. He was still good against Tracer, and now was even better at killing tanks. So overall, Torb is in a solid place today. Going into Overwatch 2, Tracer, unlike most characters, received only one change, which was a damage nerf from 6 to 5. It seems like despite the decisions of the old dev team, they at least understood that Tracer in a 5v5 format would be super strong. Even with Tracer's nerf being the lowest damage she has ever had in Overwatch 2, she was still super strong in dive, and was really good alongside Genji with the new DPS passive, which gave her a quicker reload, but more importantly, a movement speed buff after a kill. Balance wise, Tracer's received some changes with the damage numbers, but for the most part has really only been nerfed. But even now, she is still one of the best DPS in the game, and is still super strong right now. Venture is a character that only recently came out. However, they have only been nerfed in Overwatch 2 ever since the first one came after the trial weekend, all the way up to the most recent one from the mid-season patch that happened just a few days ago, which nerfed the shield they get when using their abilities. There isn't too much to say here. Even after the nerfs, I still feel like Venture is a super solid pick. Not broken, but good in the right places and can burst down any squishy in a heartbeat. Widowmaker is one of the hardest characters to balance. One-shots in games are generally not fun, but how do you balance a character whose identity is one-shots and make it work in 5v5? Well, it's a question really no one has found an answer to besides going Sombra. Currently though, Widow's weakest state was in Season 5. Just a few months earlier, her HP was nerfed down to 175 from 200. However, people were still complaining, so they nerfed her again by changing the damage falloff min and max range from 70 to 100 meters to 40 and 60 meters, as well as the damage scaler also being increased from 30% to 50%. These were great changes and brought her power down for sure, but even today she is still a massive problem and there is really no solution in sight. Season 9 changed pretty much everything, and Ana was no different. She was really hurt by these changes overall. Now, she received no direct changes, even though coming into this season, Ana had pretty much been taking nerf after nerf after nerf. Season 9 really hurt her though for 3 main reasons. The first one was her weapon no longer killing targets in 3 shots and now requiring a 4th one. The second was her sustain being nerfed with the DPS passive, at the time lowering healing by 20%. Her nade was only doing 45 healing, which is actually just so bad. Tracer was also the best character in the game during this time, and she lost her ability to sleep, nade, shoot, melee to kill her, making fighting Tracer genuinely just impossible. This period came to an end when the DPS passive was nerfed, but also on March 12th when her nade damage would be buffed from 60 to 90. These were truly dark days for my favorite blue granny. But luckily, she's a lot better now, so big ups to my girl. Baptiste has been good for pretty much all of Overwatch 2, which is why you might be surprised that he has actually really only been buffed, with nerfs only coming to tone down previous things they changed about him, making release actually his worst state. This was before Immortality Field got its HP minimum up to 25% instead of 10%. Which is massive in current day as the HP pools are higher, so that overall percentage is much bigger. It feels weird to call this his worst state because he was still really good even during this state, but stats wise this was technically his lowest point. Brig, like Bap, has been solid throughout all of Overwatch 2, though can be somewhat map and meta dependent, which is why you don't see her all the time. However, also like Bap, she has really only been buffed, with the big buff coming when she got her ult rework to give her that giant shield that she has today, which obviously she didn't have back then. Otherwise, her repair packs have received a few changes, but are virtually the same to when she started, making release her worst state. Nothing really much to say. Illari is one of my favorite characters. It has been really great ever since her release. However, that all came crashing down in Season 9. Before, Illari used to be able to 2-shot squishies if she hit a double headshot with full charge. However, that now required an extra shot, assuming they received no healing. Speaking of that, her healing was pretty rough. The beam was still solid, but with the DPS passive, the pylon was now only doing 24 HP healing per tick. With characters like Zen going around this time, there was really just no reason to play Illari. Her healing was trash, and the thing that made her unique was her damage was just not that good. I think it's very telling that she was buffed in the next 4 patches, which finally put her back in the meta as one of the best characters in the game. Did they maybe overtune her? Sure. But I think it's really telling to show just how bad she was, and she was easily a bottom 5 character in the game during this time. Juno is the newest support added to Overwatch, and it was available to play during a small trial weekend in July to mix reviews. Everyone loved her and agreed she was one of the most amazing and healthy supports the devs have ever added, but no one knew if she was broken or weak, and the decision was pretty split. However, on release into comp, the devs leaned more towards her being strong, so they decided to nerf her HP down from 250 to 225, her torpedoes getting a small damage buff of 10, which was fine. Speed Ring's deploy range was also increased to 3.5 and the cooldown was reduced to 14 seconds from 16. as well as Orbital Ray now traveling faster. But the big nerf was to her fire rate, going from 34 shots a second to 28. This was huge and made her feel just absolutely terrible to play and pick. It's pretty funny looking back because, spoiler alert, Juno as of writing this is the best character in the game. But on launch, people were crying because they felt like she was just so bad. Well, at least they got justice because Juno is pretty damn strong right now in current day Overwatch. Kiriko has been changed a lot in Overwatch 2, almost all of which being nerfs or quote rescalings of power in her kit. However, in the last few months, the devs have finally actually started to give serious nerfs to the character, with the first of which coming in Season 9. While she didn't receive any direct changes, she could no longer two-shot headshot squishies thanks to the new HP increases. However though, she could still melee combo Tracer, which was big because Tracer would go on to dominate for months to come. The next ones came on June 20th, bringing her Swift Step cooldown from 7 to 8 seconds, and making Suzu no longer cleanse strong knockbacks, with the biggest interaction being that she can no longer cleanse Rein Shatter, which was a massive buff to Rein. Now, the next one could arguably be considered a buff, but in my opinion, it's a nerf, which came on August 20th, which nerfed her HP down from 250 to 225, with the compensating buff being Kitsune's headshot multiplier going from 2.5 to 2, but the damage was buffed to 60, with the recovery time being increased from 0.5 to 0.55. While Kiriko is still good today, she is no longer the de facto pick in any comp, and has surely been taken down a peg. Lifeweaver is easily the worst a character has ever been on release, by far. I think we all remember people like DeFran quitting their unranked to GMs, and if you've seen the cinematic masterpiece known as How This Overwatch 2 Hero Ruined My Life, I think we all know just how bad he was. Almost everything about him was trash, but at the time, it took 2.5 seconds to automatically reload your inactive weapon, making switching feel so bad. For his healing, he only had 12 ammo. 12 ammo! That's just terrible. His spread was also much higher, making aiming just dog shit. His tree also only had 1000 HP, and each pulse only did 50 healing. But the big thing was that it would not overheal into overhealth like it does today. He also still had the Parting Gift passive, which dropped a little healing blossom that would heal anyone that was near it. However, this mostly just benefited flankers because Lifeweaver is so big and his hitbox was even bigger during this time that flankers could easily just kill him and get a free little bit of healing, making this overall just a nerf to him. Healing Blossom also only maxed out at 65 compared to the 80 it is today. Life Grip also didn't heal the target, and you were able to pull things like Rein Shattering, which made this terrible in rank specifically. His dash also only healed 25 HP, and he had no shield health. The list of buffs Weaver has gotten is so long that I could just keep yapping about it. But I hope that these are able to paint a picture on just how bad he was. And if you ever are complaining about your character being terrible, just remember that release Lifeweaver was once in the game. Lucio in Season 1 was easily one of the best supports in the game, and was early only beaten out by Kiriko, who still hadn't been nerfed. I think we all remember the TikToks talking about Lucio having an insane use rate in Overwatch League during this time because dive was super strong. With all that being said, his weakest state was... Wait. You're telling me that his weakest state was... How? Well, Lucio in nature is a must pick in several comps, and only recently with Juno has had any type of competition for his monopoly on speed. After Dive fell out of the meta, Lucio fell down with them. Everyone knew Lucio wasn't bad, but the devs wanted to make him a little bit better, which is why they reduced his ult cost by 7% on February 7th, making by raw numbers his weakest state actually being on release, surprisingly. Poor Mercy has been horrendous ever since Season 9. Pretty much everything about this patch hurt her. For one, the increase in HP pools made her damage boost overall much worse as it wasn't as impactful as it once was. The bigger hitboxes also meant that hitting a flying Mercy was much easier. but the big one was the new DPS passive, which made her healing go from 55 per second to 45. While she did get some small buffs to help out, overall she just sucked and kind of surprisingly was left there for months. However, on August 20th, she was given a small bit of help. Her HP was nerfed down from 250 to 225, but was compensated with her healing going to 60 and damage boost going back up to 30%. Well, I think personally her HP being lowered and dive being good make her a little bit worse in that sense. The DPS passive has been toned down, and overall, especially with the tanks being nerfed and the projectile sizes being slightly brought down, Season 9 has had its effects on her, but she's slowly getting slightly better. But she's still pretty garbage, even today. Moira has always been a character that provides consistent value with her high healing output and ability to damage, as well as the added effect of her being super easy to play against dive because she is able to fade away easily. But in my opinion, I would say that Season 12 is her weakest state, after she received a nerf to her HP from 250 to 225, in exchange for a measly 5 more damage per second. For context, in Season 9 when HP pools were increased, Moira's damage was buffed by 15 per second. Moira isn't really bad, just not an amazing pick, and not the best in the world to say the least. And with the lower HP, it made killing her with dive a whole lot easier. And speaking from experience, you could definitely feel it. This period ended when, as of writing this just 3 days ago in Season 12 during the mid-season patch, her damage output during Coalescence was buffed from 70 to 85 per second. Today, this makes her a decent character, not meta, but still a fan of menace to all my Silver 2 homies out there. Ever since Zen's peak in dominance during Season 9 when he had 275 HP, Zen has been put in this weird limbo state of not being bad, but somewhat being outclassed in many ways. This all changed on July 9th when tanks would receive massive buffs, with the big winner being D.Va. Zen naturally really struggles versus D.Va, but with micro missiles also being buffed, it made Zen get absolutely slaughtered. This caused Hyperdive to become meta, which would only get worse in Season 12 when Juno was released into the game. At first, she was rated pretty lowly, but after a few buffs became the best character in the entire game. D.Va boosters plus Juno speedring was a nightmare for Zen to fight against. Along with him being harassed by tracers and Sombras made his life a living hell. During this period, Zen was probably the worst support in the game, which is really saying something because Lifeweaver and Mercy are right there. He just died too easily and was just eaten up by the people around him. This came to an end in the mid-season patch, where his orb damage was buffed from 48 to 50, as well as Discord orb cooldown per target being reduced from 7 to 6. These changes are very new, so we don't know how they will affect Zen, but they will definitely help him as D.Va was also nerfed again, and Speedring no longer stacking with Juno's Speedring. Currently, Zen is better than he was before, and with a few meta changes, I know for sure my Zen monk boy will rise again. Damn, this shit was fucking long. Thank you all so much for watching the last video I made going over the strongest states of every character. It got so much support, and I hope that this time the background gameplay is not as bad, because I know I got so many comments shitting on my gameplay. No, I'm not fucking crying. You are! Anyways, thank you to Karq, and thank you all for watching this video and watching the end. Let me know if you guys have any more video ideas, and that's all I got. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all around. Take care.
Alright. I'd be shocked if we placed under Diamond. I'd be shocked. I think we placed like Diamond 3.
What?